I'm Chris Otts here in the WDRB Plus studio, and today I've got Pat Mulloy. He's the Deputy Mayor of Economic Development for Mayor Craig Greenberg, and we're talking about a new plan for growing Louisville's economy. It's called Growing Louisville Together, and Pat's going to help us break it down. Well, Pat, thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate you coming in.
Glad to. Thanks, Chris.
So let's just start with, I'd like to talk a little bit about your background.
Okay.
From what I could tell, you're a lawyer by training,
I am.
and you ran a number of senior living companies
I did.
in your career. So a lot of experience as a private business person, and now
Right.
you come into this role as deputy mayor for Mayor Greenberg over economic development. So tell me, how did you come upon this particular position, and what convinced you to take it, and then also how your private sector experience informs your approach to this job.
Okay. Uh, I was born and raised here, grew up here, public school kid here, and oldest of three boys, all of whom are lawyers. So we have this sort of genetic thing in our family. My dad was a lawyer, practiced law a few blocks from here. And so I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer, and went off to college in Nashville and stayed there for law school. And I've always had a public policy itch, and came back, started practicing law. Actually ran for Congress when I was 30 years old.
Hmm.
Got that out of my system at a young age. I lost to Gene Snyder, who was a 20-year Republican incumbent, and
Huh.
in a close race.
So you
but-
don't get a freeway named after you, unfortunately.
No, that's another story. But
There's still time.
He was actually a classmate of my dad's in law school, and so Gene, he's gone now. And but then I went back to the practice of law, and my dad always had he was a heavy investor in real estate all over the county, but a lot in downtown Louisville. So downtown was kind of his passion. So I was raised with that. And then in '92, out of the blue, several friends of mine had gone to work for Brereton Jones, who just passed away. Good friend of mine ran his campaign. Another friend of mine, Franklin Jelsma, was the chief of staff. And I got a call out of the blue.
Former Kentucky governor, we should say.
Yes, former Kentucky governor and a good guy. And I got a call out of the blue and said, would you take a leave from the law practice? And they needed a secretary of finance. And so I did it. And I said, I'll stay 2 years. And I stayed, I think, 2 years to the day. And really loved it. Jones was an easy guy to work for. He was ethical. We had Philip Shepard was in the cabinet. Franklin Jelsman was in the cabinet, a great general counsel from Northern Kentucky, Crit Llewellyn. It was a really nice, talented team. And I got to work on a bunch of interesting policy stuff. That was during the era. Jimmy Gray did a bunch of Secretary of Transportation. Jimmy and I were classmates in college. And he came up and volunteered his time on a reinventing government. If you'll remember Clinton in that time era, they were trying to figure out how to downsize government, right-size government, change processes in government. So we did a huge project in that area. We also did the first tax reform work that had been done in 25 years in the state, and interestingly, came to the same conclusions that the Republicans now in the state legislature and Governor Beshear signed last year, with a lowering of the income tax, some flexibility, closing exemptions on the sales tax. So I really loved that.
Interesting.
It was fun. It was fun work. Went back in, back to the law practice. I was with a different firm at the time, and then out of the blue, there was a Louisville entrepreneur that gave me a call, and they had started they were a large hospital company here in town, and they had buried inside that hospital company. Back in the late 90s, assisted living was a new product relatively in the marketplace. The notion of a private pay residential place for seniors to live. And he gave me an opportunity. I had dinner with him, and when he said, I'd like you to come in and run, I'd never been CEO of anything before. And but I love the business. It's a great service model. It had all the stuff I like. There's policy, regulatory, elder care is fascinating work, and then the whole bricks and mortar and how you run the operations. A little bit like the mayor falling in love with the hotel business, just different industry. And so I set off, and over nearly 25 years, we built 3 different companies. So learned a lot. I always tell folks I'm a bit of an accidental business person. I had a dad that taught me a lot, and I was exposed to a lot. and so I like it, and I'm still licensed to practice law. I think of myself as a lawyer, but I like the business side a little bit more, and I love the city. That's the answer to your question as to why I took this job. I was not an insider in Mayor's campaign.
Hmm.
I knew him. He and I sat for years on the board of a large bank here in town together as directors.
That's Republic, correct?
Republic, yeah. And I knew him from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think his kids are younger than mine, but he was a parent at the same school where my kids and grandkids go. And so we knew each other socially.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, I wasn't an insider in his campaign. And honestly, the call came out of the blue in late April, I think.
Really?
Yeah. So
Mayor Greenberg just called you up and said, "Pat, I need you
yeah,
to,
maybe
to take this on."
I didn't ask him. I was 8th or 9th on his list, but he called me and I went downtown and talked with he and David Kaplan. And Kaplan, I only knew a bit. I knew Kaplan. He's got a tremendous reputation as a lawyer, but I don't think he and I ever had any matters together. We have some mutual friends. And so I came down and talked to him, and the mayor said, I want to do this, this, and this. I want to focus on the central business district. Louisville needs kind of need a fresh start after a lot of the tough issues over the last year, and that's not being pejorative about any leaders that were in the past. Greg Fisher is a friend of mine. But sometimes I've been in the second person in a business, and I've been the person that left the business, and people come in after you. So sometimes you just need a fresh look at issues.
Sure. So let's then talk about what you've been doing. And obviously, this new economic development plan is one of the first pieces of business that you started working on there,
Right.
correct? Right. So it's called Growing Louisville Together.
Right.
And before we start talking about the specifics and the details, why don't you just give me an overview of what the mayor is trying to accomplish with this new plan?
I think it is to create. You can write a lot of plans, and he was very intentional about having no interest, and I don't have any interest in wasting my time on something that's just a binder on somebody's desk. I've seen that done in projects before, and I've seen strategic planning exercises that don't have any tactical steps or abilities to measure anything, or frankly, processes that get set up after the plan's written. And Mayor Greenberg's not that way. He's an action guy. He's sounded superficial, but he has this bent to action, this bent to intentionally taking on issues. And I said, if you're serious about that, I said, let's get a SWOT analysis done. Let's find a consultant that can help us, almost for not political reasons, but for process reasons. Sometimes you need an outside expert to just get a fresh set of eyes on the issues, and frankly, somebody from outside of Louisville.
Yeah.
And so we found the right team, two people, one a workforce expert and one the guy that had been head of economic development for a real successful mayor in the early 90s up in Indianapolis. And he said, I want something specific. I want something that's measurable. He said, I want some big ideas, and there's some big ideas in here, but there's also a lot of just practical things that we can get done. One example, I was in Frankfurt yesterday meeting with the governor's secretary of the cabinet and his budget people, just talking about process for where we're going in January with this session, downtown Louisville. And it's a longer conversation, but there are a lot of good things going on in downtown Louisville, but there are a lot of structural issues and problems, one of which is we're about 76% occupied in office buildings across the country. That's not unique to Louisville. That's pretty much every large city in the country.
Yep.
It's got that same issue, and it's COVID, it's changing in workforce, it's technology. There are a lot of reasons for it. But we need some money. I mean, I've spent now 7 months in this job, and I've talked to 25 developers, serious people that want to do a hotel in X building or convert office to residential in Y building. And it's getting better now, but this peak in interest rates, it's just stopped. I mean, I made those arguments in the One Park conversation with Metro Council here over the last 2 or 3 weeks. It is, if you're trying to develop anything right now, it's hard. It's hard to find the capital just because interest rates, they were higher actually when I got out of law school. But for somebody your age, you've never lived through interest rates like this.
Right.
And so that stopped it. And then you couple that with the inflation that's happened. Marilyn Harris, who runs housing for us, terrific subject matter expert. She hasn't released this yet, but in the next few weeks, they will release the new housing needs assessment that we have to do, that we do as a matter of process.
Is this the one that tells us how much affordable housing we need and how short we are?
Yeah. And actually, and the numbers haven't moved. They're within the same range that we talk about now. There's a 30-ish thousand need in this community. The mayor's trying to build 15,000 with the My Louisville Home Plan. But that takes capital. And, the state has never contributed much in terms of affordable housing trust fund dollars into this community. The mayor, I think, is asking for $10 million a year every year going forward. We've got to have that kind of commitment out of council. And it's a longer conversation, but how housing gets built and the density of housing, he wants to open up that conversation in town, and we've got to.
Well, you sort of started your answer anticipating one of my questions, which
Okay.
is that as a reporter focused on these kinds of issues, I've seen what I call basically the cycle of planning a lot. At first, people want you to cover their new plans that they're going to do. And it seems like I've seen this dynamic over and over again. Somebody new comes into running some organization or political entity, and they say, let's do a big plan. And this is everything we're going to do. The plan is produced at great cost, a lot of consultant expense. And then
About $150,000 here.
Yeah,
Wasn't
okay.
too terrible. So.
Okay, all right. Well, 5 or 10 years go by.
Right.
Very little fundamentally changes until at some point, either the same group of folks or a new group of folks comes in and says, look at this plan. This is really out of date. We need to do a new plan. And the process just repeats itself over again. So it sounds like the mayor's administration has a much different intention for this plan in terms of its usability and the follow through. Is that right?
Yes. You have valid reasons to be cynical, because we've all seen that, whether it's in for-profit entities or not-for-profit entities. You can plan, and planning honestly without action is kind of sophistry. It's silliness. Doesn't mean much. And I got paid a lot of years in 3 different senior housing companies to take at Atria. We started, we had 19 communities and grew it to 65, and that were some such number. And that was very intentional. Had to go raise the capital, had to figure out geographically where we went, had to hire the right people, had to build a human resource function, a construction function, all that stuff. Now, city government, the good news is there's a lot of great people in city government. I'm not one of these people that's cynical about government. It's easy to be cynical about government. But I've met some serious, very talented people. I've got a woman in our organization that runs an organization that 99% of the people in this town would never heard of, but it's a small lending company with about $5 million in the bank, and it's making loans at the very front lines of the economy where a young Chris or a young Sally will not have access to $50,000 or $25,000, and she's making real loans with a small staff in that area. I've got a guy named Jeff O'Brien who works for me, who's as good a subject matter expert as you'll find in the city. So we've got people that have an inclination to action and have an inclination to execute, but sometimes you've got to dust stuff off. And whether it's office buildings in downtown Louisville, I've said publicly there's 6 or 7 buildings in downtown that will never be offices in my lifetime. I'll be at Cave Hill before they're offices again. And but they need to be residential, and they could be residential, or they could be hotels. So figuring out specifically how to do certain projects like that, how to reimagine the downtown space. The mayor is he hired an outfit out of London called Heatherwick that's going to reimagine. We have a very tired public park that no one walks up to called the Belvedere. And it's got the best view in the city. It's a magnificent view out over the Falls of the Ohio. I don't think 100 people go up there every week. And it's got some structural issues. It sits behind the Galt House. It's not connected to the Ali Museum, which is next door, and it's not connected to the Museum Plaza site. And the waterfront park people are going to connect all those parks beneath it. So there's an opportunity. That's just one example of completely redoing the quality of place in downtown. So I just, the answer to your question is, I should be fired if in 6 months we don't have or quit. And if in 6 months we don't have a meaningful platform set up, and there's talking here about a 501c, we're not quite sure yet. I've got lawyers working on it. Organization that will be the body that will drive the actual work of economic development. Some of it will be, I want it to be controlled by the private sector. There are models around the country that work that way. But we're going to take, I'm going to spend the next couple of months. I've got to get some people in place that'll actually help me build the process. And then we're actually going to build a dashboard that'll be public that you'll be able to look at and say, okay, have you done X, Y, or Z, or why haven't you done X, Y, or Z? So it's really about implementing the plan. And is everything in these 52 pages will it get done? No. And directionally, do we want to get substantial progress made over the next 3+ years of his first term? Yes, that's his goal.
I see. Well, and there are a lot in those 52
There are.
pages. So
Yep.
we cannot obviously talk about everything, but I did want to, touch on some of the bigger things. So then in the first section, it's about investing in quality of place, and you mentioned the redoing of the Belvedere space as just one example in that. I think within that it does talk about the mayor's plan for 15,000 affordable housing units. This has been a big, big issue. And it says in there, one thing to consider is reforming our land development code to make it easier to build such housing.
Right.
But I do wonder, it does seem like there's some tensions here. I mean, we just saw the Metro Council reject a affordable housing development off Cane Run Road that had been proposed before. And so, we do see this dynamic over and over again where people are broadly in favor of affordable housing, but not necessarily where I lived, and the NIMBYism. Yes. And I'm just curious, as a community, do you think we have the political will, the community will, to actually build the housing that we apparently so desperately need?
I think we do. I think it's a moral imperative. It's a moral and an economic imperative. I met last week with George Eklund, who I didn't know, who's a senior staff person with the Coalition for the Homeless, and brought me the data as best as we can capture the data. And tonight there'll be somewhere around 500 or 600 people on the street, mostly men, but women and children as well, that don't have any housing to go. And most of the transitional and housing in this city will be full. And it's a complicated problem. A lot of psychosocial services have to be wrapped around the real estate. But city after city that has succeeded in this space has increased the supply. And it's not just of affordable. If you increase the supply of affordable, Chris Dishinger at LDG, he'll build a 200 and something unit, or his team will, complex, and there'll be X percentage of it's affordable, but the rest of it will be market rate housing. And what that does is it increases the supply. Minneapolis, there was an article in the Journal in the last couple of weeks, and the rate of inflation on their rental rates there has decreased. It doesn't stop, but it's not going up as steeply as it did just because they've increased the supply. So you've got I got a lecture at a Christmas party last night. Some fellow said, you need to do what Houston did. This will get to your land development code issue.
Well, the mayor actually talked about Houston's
but Houston doesn't have any zoning laws. That's right.
Yes.
I mean, to amount to anything.
Yeah.
And so, we've got to have an intelligent conversation about the land development code. Now, Jeff O'Brien in my shop he's an expert in it. I'm not.
Yeah. But overall, it needs to get easier.
It's got
density's got to get easier. Density has to be more built in.
Yeah. In neighborhoods, we ought to have the ability to build duplexes or tiny homes or triplexes on lots that we traditionally didn't think. The staff people at Planning and Zoning have explained to me, apparently sometime in the history of this city, we kind of went through the entire town and gave it R4 zoning, which is kind of what we all typically live in with single-family lots. But that's not the way of the world today. And not everybody needs 3 or 4, even if they can afford it, 4,000 square foot home. There's a whole market today for 1,500 square foot homes and 1,200 and 1,800. So filling that in, filling the infill sites in, and honestly filling them in all areas of town, whether it's Cane Run Road or Prospect or Fern Creek. Every neighborhood in this city is entitled to have housing where people can live. And sometimes it's just change is hard, but I hope we're able to have over the next 6 months some intelligent conversation about that.
Yeah, I was about to say it's going to take some leadership because like what I said, when it comes down to it, individual neighborhoods and people, sometimes you do run into opposition that you didn't anticipate. Right? Yeah. Okay, so let's just hit on some other things from the plan. It talks a lot about population growth and getting that going, and it says the city's greatest opportunity for population growth has been and continues to be the attraction of foreign-born residents. Between 2020 and 2040, Louisville could add 80,000 foreign-born residents, and that would take the share from 9% to 18%. I thought that was an interesting note, and for sure, immigration adds a lot of dynamism to our economy. I could also see that level of change again being something that maybe uh, the status quo might have trouble accepting, adapting to. I'm just curious your broad view of immigration and its role in the city's growth.
I think it's vital. It's absolutely vital. Um, Go talk to Kevin Nolan, who runs GE, and
Hmm.
where he
GE Appliances, they
GE
will
Appliances.
correct
Yes,
you. Yes,
thank you.
it's not General Electric
No, it's
anymore.
not big GE,
Uh,
but it's a big company.
uh-huh.
And but the immigrant portion
Hmm.
of his workforce out there is vital to them. It's Shep and I guess it's Fern Valley and Old
Hmm.
Shepherdsville, sort of the epicenter, I'm told, of um, the Cuban American population in this city, which apparently outside of Miami, we have the second largest or fastest growing
Yep.
center of Cuban immigration in this town. I heard there's some conversation going around about a center for immigration law, perhaps at the University of Louisville Law School. There's a huge need, and Louisville has always been, honestly, a quiet leader in that space. I mean, there are whole
Hmm.
pockets of Middle Eastern and Southeast Asian and Southeast Asian and Cuban immigration that's happened quietly all over this town. I think it's vital. As somebody, I spent years working in healthcare, where and a lot of your workforce in healthcare are frontline workers doing all the jobs that you and I won't do for a living every day, helping
Hmm.
grandmother in and out of the shower, bathing people. That hard, important work, but relatively low paid work. And I remember we had 1,200 units in San Diego County, where probably 80% of my workforce was Hispanic American folks. And without that steady flow of immigrant population, we'd had much more significant wage inflation. And the country hopefully will get to a rational conversation about this. You're saying it won't in the next, not this with this presidential cycle coming up
Hmm.
right now. There'll be a lot of hard, ugly talk about the southern border in this country. Um, but honestly, if you look at the Canadian model, where they're thoughtfully, I think, letting 300, 400,000 new citizens in every year, they don't have nearly the wage inflation we have in this country. And
Hmm.
it's a supply and demand issue. It's
Uh,
also the American story.
right.
My
Right.
great grandparents were immigrants from Ireland 150 years ago in this town in Portland. So it's in the West End. So it's how you create the middle class.
Let's hit a couple other broad themes from the plan. So, enhancing venture capital and startups is just how I'm summarizing
Right.
one of the focus areas. Um, and if you ask me, actually, if you of all the areas that of the plan that are important, I would say that is maybe the most important for this reason because I've just over the years covering these things, I've sort of the reality has dawned on me that companies that create jobs and wealth in any given community tend not to pick up and move very often. They
Absolutely.
tend to stay wherever they were born, right? And they can be irrationally rooted in a place for a long, long
The
time.
humana story in this town.
Yeah,
Two lawyer business guys.
exactly. If you wanted to create a
Now it's the
Fortune
largest.
50 health insurance company, there'd be
It's an
other
amazing story.
places that, yeah. Of course, we've seen some leakages of that, but we won't go in.
I believe in Humana, and I
I
believe in
refer
their.
to my own reporting on that. Uh,
I
uh,
believe in Humana, and I believe in their presence in our city.
it,
So,
well, there's
important,
still
important citizen in this town.
there's I'm about to say there's still a lot to lose with them,
Sure.
obviously, right? But that said, um, it seems very easy to say that we need more venture capital, more angel networks, more entrepreneurs, more investors. But I'm a little bit unsure of what metro government can do
Hmm.
practically
Hmm.
to foster that environment. And curious your overall thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a fair question, and if you're, I was very blessed in my life. I had a father who was very networked, who opened 1 million doors for me. So
Hmm.
yeah, I had a lot of entrepreneurial doors open for me, but there are a lot of folks that don't have that kind of network and have no access to capital. And so I think there's several layers to the answer to your question. Terry Hathaway, who I was alluding to a few minutes ago, who runs Metco, there's a whole world of small business lending that there's a huge vacuum in this town, and we've got to step up our game in that area. There's a whole world in that early stage money my friend Jim Beckett, who's trying to do this rodeo development up in the Park Hill
Mm-hmm.
neighborhood, looking for that first layer of capital, that first guarantee that his company needs to get that project started. I mean, I don't quite know exactly where he is, but I know he's like a lot of entrepreneurs. That's the hardest part of the work. So there's a whole body of work to be done there. There is the whole a whole body of work, and Dr. Schatzel, I think, is
Mm-hmm.
keenly interested in this. There's a
President of University of Louisville, we should say.
Yep, who's first rate. She and I interact a lot on the University of Louisville hospital work, and she came from a business. You know, she was a Ford Motor executive, and I think had a couple of other business lives before she came to academia and higher education. But she wants to build construct a business engagement center downtown. Part of the problem in this town is there's not, for a while, everybody on every street corner was setting up an incubator, but we still didn't have a good system of how to navigate the system and where to go for help. We've got early stage venture firms in this town, not a ton of them, a few render capital. Patrick,
what they're doing is
really important because they're finding the Chris, who's 28 years old, who's got an idea and might have the ability to cobble $10,000 together, but doesn't know where to go put $100,000 together, or how to rent a CFO, or how to get any legal advice without paying a law firm a ridiculous amount of money. So
they're also offering nice big investments for people who are willing to move their little company, their little startup to Louisville.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
And Larry Horn and Jen Callahan at Amplify. They're not in the capital raising business, but they have a whole database they've constructed. They have all kinds of outside services. Dave Christopher at Amped, I don't know the exact number, but he just graduated 30 African-American entrepreneurs through his training center. And he told me last week, he's got 500 entrepreneurs on a waiting list looking for the services that he's offering in that not-for-profit entity. So there's a whole early stage world there that we've got to build. And then you've got to be able to go to the next stage. Louisville has never been, unlike Nashville, and there are a lot of reasons for it in Nashville, but we've never been a hotbed of private equity capital or venture capital. Dave Jones Jr. had a terrifically successful firm for a lot of years, but there aren't 5 of those firms in town. And most people, they're angel investor networks, but it's hard to find that high net worth woman or man that is going to, it's hard for early stage entrepreneurs to do that. So building that ecosystem, and then on top of that, I do think you asked about government. One of our asks in the governor's or in the next budget, it'll be the state Senate and House and the governor's budget. Is there are 2 entities in state government, Commonwealth Seed Capital, which they haven't put any new money in 20 years. I think it's sitting on about $15 million. They've just done a new strategic plan. Alice Houston here in town is on their board. They've hired a new CEO, Selby Price, who runs Key Horse Capital, which is more focused on science technology type investing. It's a smaller fund, but we ought to put some new money in that and Louisville will get its lion's share. We're 40% of the state's economy. So if the state will fund it,
I see.
We'll get our capital, share of the capital.
Right. So what we're talking about here are state-supported sort of venture funds that fund early stage businesses that could be high growth businesses that are sort of by definition located in the state. So that's the rationale for it. And from what I've seen, other states do this to a much greater degree than Kentucky does.
Tennessee's done it for years.
So let's go back to implementing this overall strategy. And I believe, if I've heard the mayor correctly, he's talking about standing up a new public-private organization that will have a $6 million annual budget.
Well, that's a swag. It's a sophisticated estimate of what it'll take. We haven't fine-tuned that number.
Well, I mean, I was like, wow, because if you look, Greater Louisville Inc.'s budget is something like $5 million. So it seems like a very tall order to overnight create a new organization that would have that level of financial support. So what am I missing there?
It's a tall order. I don't think you're missing anything, but we're going to get it done. I think the vision right now is maybe half the money will come from, I've got a budget that comes to the Economic Development Cabinet. We will take some of that team and perhaps they'll work in this new 501c whatever, but then it'll be run by the private sector with $2 to $3 million of dues. I'm not going to get into specifics, but we've had conversations with some of the key business leaders in town. I think they're absolutely committed to the idea because they want to get back at the table with an organization that's focused on implementing this plan. So I think the time is right, and I believe we'll get it done.
That's interesting. So do you think the business community support for this new organization is going to be there and it won't cannibalize from GLI?
Well, there's no intention to. We need a
Yeah.
robust chamber of commerce, but this is not a chamber of commerce. This is an organization dedicated to implementing the plan. And there's cities around the country that have done this. Houston's a model, Pittsburgh's a model, Tulsa's got a model. Since they're all a little bit different.
Yeah.
So
Columbus, Ohio, too, I
they've got
think
a
has this sort
successful
of
model.
regional organization. Yeah. Would this organization be focused on the borders of Louisville Metro, or would it it be a regional? But like, you know, if the best place for a company is Southern Indiana, this organization could be involved in
Well, I think
sending them there.
GLI has built that regional infrastructure. There's no intention to step on that or to cannibalize anything. I've in some conversations with some of the other organizations in town. The mayor's thesis and my thesis is that a rising tide lifts all the boats, and we got to get the tide up. The most telling thing in the appendix to this plan, we've had no population growth in this town. We've had the percentage of young people that are getting degrees every year. The percentage hasn't grown. We've lost, 0.2 of a point over the last decade in that 25 to 40 age cohort. That part we've got to change. We got to get the trajectory moving this way instead of flat. The good news is it's not down. We're not a dying town. There's the foundations of what we have here. I wouldn't be doing this if I'm not an optimist, and I love the city. So Louisville's got Larry Giggerich. When we broke at our last meeting, he said, you all have got a 2-year window. He said, Nashville it's overblown its infrastructure down there. It's hard to buy a starter home in that town. Very expensive place to live right now. The state legislature has our tax burden in this state is now pretty competitive. I had a good meeting with Ashley Watts yesterday at the state chamber. They're not done. I'd argue with my friend Mike Mountjoy about this. I think we'll eventually get to a 3% state income tax, and that's probably a sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
And it will allow growth. That stuff does matter from a marketing standpoint. So I think we're in a good spot.
Well, why don't we close on this though? So just give me your elevator pitch for, you rattled off some statistics there about not Louisville going backwards, but just sort of stagnating and wanting to get the growth trajectory up. So if you just had a handful of things that you think are so integral to getting that growth trajectory going at a faster pace, what would you say are the key things that need to happen?
2 or 3 things. Number one, we got to get started executing this plan. But even more important than that, and it's one of the later things in the plan, we've got to, and I don't mean this in any superficial way, and the mayor doesn't mean it in any superficial way. The mayor, when he talks about it, he uses the word authentic a lot. The adjective is the one he uses. Louisville has this authentic, unique quality of place story. And telling that story in a big, robust way, I think will be enormously appealing, particularly to young people. And I think we can become what Austin, Texas was 10 years ago, or what Nashville was 10 or 15 years ago. You can't beat the quality of life here. I've lived here all my life with a sojourn away for college and law school and off to New York after law school for a bit. But the quality of life is extraordinary here. The parks, and notwithstanding all the noise and conversation and hard stuff, we've got 3 really good legs of school systems in this town. There are great parochial alternatives. There are great independent school alternatives. And Marty Polio is doing terrific work. It's very tough work. He may have the hardest job in the city in moving JCPS ahead. So I think all of it, keeping the education moving in the right direction, telling our story, building a brand, getting this plan started. And the other, I said this publicly at the Impetus meeting the other day, the thread that runs through all of this is the success of the University of Louisville. Dr. Schatzel's success, her ability to build a best-in-class series of schools, not just a mediocre, I'm not saying anything is mediocre, but her engineering school needs to be top quartile. The medical school and the medical center needs to be top quartile. In LouMed, 16,000 people in all 3 work cycles, every day shifts, work in that part of town. And that needs to be an extraordinary place to live, and it needs to be surrounded with housing all over it. And
There's certainly a lot of room to go up around there.
A lot of room to go up. She's going to put up, hopefully, and I think she'll get the money. She's asked for $280, $300 million to build a health sciences center right in the heart of LouMed. and that with the new hospital we're building over there, it's a brand new
Right.
face going on the
Right.
hospital.
Right. You can see
That's
it
going to change the
starting
face
on
of that
that.
whole place.
Right.
So, anyway, I would say those are the 3 or 4 key things.
Well, unless there's anything else you wanted to say, I will just say that I appreciate you sitting down and talking it through with us, and I'm looking forward to that dashboard so us pesky reporters can be
Go,
checking on the
"Why is this?"
progress later and have you back maybe in 6 months or a
Sure.
year and see how this is going. But Pat, thank you very much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Happy holidays to you.
All right,
care.
you too.
Bye-bye. Thank you.